Hey everyone, welcome back to NGF News. My name is Alec and we have Joshua Cheatham here. For this week's latest global developments, we have a big agenda today. We're discussing three big things that happened in the news recently that we feel is very important for everyone to know. So, for the first one, we're going to be talking about the G20 finance minister meeting in India ending in a stalemate. Then we're going to move on to the future of U.S. China relations, which John Kerry made a statement about that climate will be the next kind of big thing for U.S. China relations. So we're going to dive into that as well. And then finally on our agenda, we're going to be talking about the Russian strikes on Ukrainian grain ports after Russia left from the export deal. So we're going to go straight into the G20 finance minister meeting. So this is not the actual G20 meeting. The meetings, there's a few meetings that happened beforehand. I do apologize if there are any cars that are going by. uh, Third world country problems. But so there's a couple meetings that happened before the actual G20, which is going to be in early September. And this one is a finance minister meeting, so they'll have a bunch of financial representatives from each different country. So for us, we had the Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen. Is that
Janet Yellen.
Janet Yellen? God damn. Okay,
Janet
close
Yellen.
enough. So she was representing the U.S. in these in the meeting, and then of course all others had their own ministers to represent them. So in the actual meeting, G20 finance ministers failed to reach a consensus on some issues, including the one on Russia's war in Ukraine. India, as the G20 president, issued a summary and an outcome document to highlight the talks and disagreements. China and Russia were ones to object to the references in the document about the war and the impact on the global economy. What else was on here? The IMF and the World Bank emphasized the need for more and faster, effective debt restructuring processing, and we also had just some other things about Russia's end to the grain export deal, which was brought up in there as well. But um, in general, it was pretty stalemate between the finance ministers. Of course, it was kind of expected, really, because of Russia and China having their own little side, and then all the West is like, "Oh, you're doing this bad," and then Russia and China is like, "Well, no, we don't believe in." So
Yeah.
it was kind of expected to happen.
No, it definitely was. And I mean, India isn't helping by being the chair and not really trying to force anything. The India's finance minister came out with a statement that said, because we still have no common language on the Russian-Ukraine war. It's fascinating that there isn't a single common language. Like, besides Russia, I think even China has stated that they want the war to end peacefully. That is something that the Chinese have reiterated, is that they want to have an equal, fair outcome for all sides. I think that's close to what their 12-point document said back in, what was that, February? A long time ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, so I think there should have been some common language, but obviously there's craziness going on in the world at the moment. But the leaders in September are going to have to now come up with a new common document of understanding, because the finance ministers haven't come up with anything. So now when they meet in New Delhi in September, all of the actual presidents and prime ministers, they're going to have to come up with something completely new, something that's hopefully reinvigorating, and that can come to a general consensus. But there was some good news. The G20 did have, or well, the chair said that they wanted consensus on particular issues such as debt distress, inflation, and threat of climate change. And the discussions on food and energy specifically were overall good, as well as climate financing and improving debt distress. So there was some good news that came out of this, a lot of good dialogue. But like you said, the overall thing is just complete stalemate
Finger pointing
over this
and
issue.
just finger pointing and no common language. I mean, it blows my mind that there wasn't even common language on things like debt restructuring and bank reforms globally.
Oh, bank reform
You,
should be a big
this
one, right?
this is you would think at a G20 finance meeting they would have at least some language, right? It had they just put geopolitics aside for a second, because this whole finance minister meeting was binded by geopolitics. Had they
Yes.
came in with a clear vision, thinking money and money only, then they wouldn't be. Then we wouldn't have had to have this conversation, and we would be talking about all the good things that came out of the finance minister meeting. But really, I think we really do need some debt restructuring here. I mean, China's playing a terrible game with how they're using debt to trap people. And of course, China would be the one to say, "Well, we don't know what you're talking about. This is a global development project. The one China, the not the one China, the Belt and Road Initiative." So I mean, even then, you can go up to China and say, "Listen, you have something here, and we do believe in global development, but your Belt and Road Initiative is not the way to do it. Here's what we can do better." And that's just like one example of what should have come out of this talk. Should
Yeah,
geopolitics have been set aside for once?
I
But
agree, and
I
what
think
you're
it's just egotistical here. Sorry, I just had
oh
to.
no, you're good. That's so true because like what you're saying, we discussed this I think in a prior episode with Janet Yellen when she was talking about when she went to go visit China and she was talking about what was it, national security and climate change with their finance minister, and it's like, why bring
Yeah,
up issues that aren't under your umbrella? Let the people who are knowledgeable and the leaders of those issues discuss them. You know, we there's no mention of supply chain issues, there's no mentions of new trade agreements that are going on, there's no messages of infrastructure agreements that have been put in this document that I've found or on research. I haven't found anything discussing those issues. Yes, it's great to talk about inflation. Yes, it's great to talk about climate financing and debt distress and food insecurities. But why do you have to bring in the war? You're going to lose a lot of ground if you bring in things that you already know you're not going to agree on. So I think it was pointless to even have this discussion in the first place at a finance meeting. This discussion should have taken place in September when all of the leaders of the countries were there. But of course, they're going to discuss this.
I mean, I get why they would discuss it, right? Because it did have a major impact on things like agricultural products for the global economy. But there's still many other things to discuss, like technology. There's a massive just call for needing chips, AI, using AI in a globalizing world. I mean, there's a bunch of other different topics that could have been discussed in this meeting, but they just raised concerns of what needs to be addressed, which is like we already know, and the IMF knows, the World Bank knows what these issues are. What
Yeah, exactly.
what are the solutions? And I think this is globalization struggling to continue is because of just lack of. I don't even know like how to explain. It's just lack of perspective, lack of.
I think a lack of understanding that like, the world needs change and it needs change now. It doesn't need to discuss change. It needs to actively pursue change.
I think
We
there's no
need to
like
implement these programs.
I think I know what you're saying. I think like there's no action, like there's no
Yeah,
need
exactly.
for it. There's no like there's just no fire to do it, which is there is a fire. There is a need. There's always been a need, but they're failing to see it because it still hasn't been urgent enough in the eyes of these diplomats and in the eyes of these finance ministers. Because had there been a call or a fire in like their mind saying we need to do this because tomorrow is not possible or tomorrow won't happen, then you would see all the geopolitics left aside. But there's still
Yeah,
the need for it to solve it is there, but they're failing to see there's still not a sense of urgency enough, even though that the even it blows my mind that the Russia Ukraine war was not enough of like, hey, we need to do this because X, Y, and Z.
yeah, exactly. And with Russia and China being the adversaries, you'd think that the other 18 parties would be like, okay, like you guys gotta quit it. We gotta come up to a consensus somehow with some issues that are important in redefining how our world is going to look in the future. So hopefully that in the September meeting in New Delhi, it'll come up with all the leaders will come up with something that they can tangibly hold, and something they can tangibly hold, and hopefully put aside the war. And I hate saying that because it's a really bad term, but like not put aside like, oh, put it in the back burner, like just put it aside and focus on fixing something while
One
continued
thing at
negotiations
least.
go on to solve the war. Yeah,
I think
something has to
there
be
was
done.
one thing that came out of this finance minister meeting, and it was a sort of like roadmap from all the big international banks, like the IMF. I mean, they're not really a bank, but like IMF, World Bank, like the big international organizations that deal with money and trade. They've developed this kind of roadmap to find more lending resources, which include things like getting more loans, getting more grants, things like that. So this was something kind of that came out, but really there wasn't a big like, oh my god, this happened in this meeting that will. This pretty much set the stage for what G20 will be. It's just going to be a really big stalemate, and
Yeah,
nothing will happen. Everyone's going to be disappointed because they think, oh my god, G20 is coming up. Maybe we might see some progress, but to me, in my opinion, after seeing this initial meeting, I'm kind of not too excited for what's to come. Maybe they might flip the switch and say, "Listen, this is what our finance ministers didn't agree on. Let's see what we can do." Maybe they might continue the conversation. Maybe they might just not.
yeah, definitely. Hopefully there's something that could come out in September. But if you have nothing else, we can move on to the next topic. That's good.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, all right. So we're looking now at the U.S.-China climate cooperations. Could that be the future of relations between the countries? Now, when Alec first sent me this headline, I said, how the hell are two countries, the leading global carbon emissions, going to come together over climate change issues when they can't come together over anything else? Well, John Kerry believes otherwise, and John Kerry has met with Li Qing, the premier, addressing Premier Li Qing on the situation, how climate change has been getting worse. We've seen record temperatures, we've seen rising seas, we've seen storms that are affecting areas, and they believe that this is something that the US and China can cooperate on to reestablish communications and relationships between both countries, as they are both worried about the effects of climate change and both truly do want to solve the issue. So I think it's very fascinating in my opinion.
I think it's a good way to move away from things like the Taiwan situation, other geopolitics, and other things that surround that kind of hinder U.S. China relations. I think what John Kerry, like I said, like when I sent you the article to me, I was thinking like you said, we're both one of the biggest polluters. How are we gonna come up to each other and say, hey, you stop doing this or you stop doing that? Stop polluting, set your limits, this and that. But what they're trying to do here, the US and China, is they're trying to find ways to create things like electrical arc furnaces, more carbon capture technology, and other things that relate to technology, to use technology to reverse CO2 emissions or try to mitigate CO2 emissions. And if we go through this way instead of trying to put limits on each other, I think this is fantastic because now we're not only are we encouraging the reduction of CO2 emissions, but we're also encouraging more kind of healthy economic competition. The US produces this, China can produce this carbon capture
Yeah,
technology. The US can create the next generation of green tech that can is more there's a the second generation windmills. I don't know, something crazy, right?
yeah,
And this kind of like if we go through this route and use economic competition technology to mitigate carbon capture to mitigate carbon emissions, I think this is the way. This is the way to do it.
yeah. I agree. And I read an article the other day, I think from Bloomberg, that said that China is now officially has the largest electric car market in the world, surpassing the likes of countries like Japan, countries in the EU, and the United States and Canada. So that's fairly interesting and kind of shows a commitment. they've also shown commitment in the past through adding more windmills, through adding nuclear power plants to help curb carbon emissions. So both sides are doing good things for climate change, the United States and China. So this is definitely a good way to cooperate. Here's the biggest issue though. They become friends. They start to really kind of like, I'm not gonna say friends, but they become better acquaintances. The alliance or their partnership gets stronger and stronger and stronger. They start making economic deals, and then the question comes up again. What about Taiwan? What happens next? And I don't think that the issue's ever going to change unless there's a change of regime within China or a change of regime within Taiwan. So while this is good and we start creating a friendship and start creating a relationship, I think it could be really bad if we create this really good relationship and then we'd say, oh, well, that Taiwan thing. And then China's like, the US stabbed us in the back. Now we're invading Taiwan. And obviously, these are layman's terms and stupid, stuff I'm saying. But it could be true because if we create this relationship and then we bring up the issue again, China could see it as a stab in the back. And that's not good.
I totally agree with that one, Josh. I think we just have to be very careful with how we approach China through economic climate. We need a new term for combining economics and climate.
Yeah,
Climate
right. Climate
economic,
economics? Yeah.
climate economics. I
Yeah,
like that.
that sounds good. Yeah, I like that too.
So climate economics will be the new term. To kind of, I think what we need to do here is to solve the Taiwan situation. We would have to use climate economics in a way where it's like, okay, listen, we both have different perspectives on Taiwan. Are we going to risk this multi-billion-dollar partnership that we have between our private sectors, whatever, hypothetically, right? Let's say there are public-private partnerships in within the U.S., public-private partnerships in China, and now they're mingling with each other, they're trading, life's going great, green tech is booming. Are they really going to risk what they can be or what they will have for geopolitics? And that's the biggest question,
And they
if that
shouldn't.
makes
And yeah, no, it makes sense because they shouldn't risk that, just as they shouldn't risk war because it's going to hurt the global economy. And here's the other thing. While one of the biggest reasons we look at Taiwan as so important is because they are a big manufacturer of chips and big manufacturer of technologies within uh their plate where Taiwan is because they're just good at it. Same with China. The United States is coming up to try and make chips with the CHIPS Act and the Science and Act to build chips within the US. But if we create this stable relationship with China and the relationship becomes very strong, economically intertwined, and let's say later on they don't invade Taiwan, but they declare Taiwan, or Taiwan goes in and says, "Okay, we're tired of it. We're going to be part of China." If we have that relationship and it's established and it's good, then we don't have to worry about losing out in the chips race or in any kind of trade race between them because our relationship is good. We let the two countries sovereignly deal it out. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that the United States comes into is that we want to pick a side. Why don't we just what was his what's the name of the Secretary of State? I always forget him. But the
Anthony Blinken.
Secretary of Anthony Blinken, he said the other day that we see a one China policy. This was in May. We see a one China policy, and that's always been the US. And the US just needs to completely stick to that, I believe, because it's not their fight. Why does it have to be our fight? If we create this relationship, in the end of the day, no matter what happens between the two, China and Taiwan, we'll be okay. As long as we keep a stable relationship with China.
I don't even think we have to choose what relationship we want to be in. We just say economics. Every time China asks the US, they're like, is it us or is it going to be Taiwan? We just say economics. We want economics. That way, The United States is like it is more focused on what they want to be with China, which is using climate economics, building green tech, carbon capture technology, all the good things, all the goodies, right?
Yeah,
And the U.S. needs to use kind of this as a way to say we want economics. We're still going to protect this region, but our main concern here is the global economy.
yeah,
If that makes sense, I'm trying to find a way to piece all this together because it's very to approach China is very delicate, and I think
yeah.
we need to go. It's like almost taking two steps forward to go one step back every time.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that we should just completely and not ignore China-Taiwan relations, but just say we view it as a one China policy and that both sides should do what's best for their for should do what's best for them. And if we just sit there and have a neutral stance, China can't get upset with us because we're not doing anything
Exactly.
wrong. We're just creating an economic stability between all three. I'm going to say use nations for lack of a better term, and that's okay. That's okay. The United States doesn't need to be involved in every single conflict or resolution within the world in terms of military. They need to be involved diplomatically and economically. But we don't need to be there to say, you can't step on their shoes. That's a sovereign territory. I mean, it's only been hurting the relationship and hurting the global geopolitical world.
Agreed. Fully agree.
Yeah,
Um, I don't have anything else to add on this. But I do think that the more we talk about it and the more I read on it, I think Perry might be onto something. That's all I
I
can say
agree.
on it.
I 100% agree.
So if you have
Well,
nothing else, we're gonna go to the big talk for the week, which
yeah,
is Russia
big talk.
strikes on Ukrainian grain ports after leaving the export deal. So this is major. Ukraine has accused Russia of damaging their grain exports infrastructure overnight, meaning they've attacked shipments, they've attacked the port, and they've attacked anything critical to export infrastructure in the Black Sea, Odessa, and Mykolaiv. Russia attacked the Odessa region after quitting a year-old deal brokered by the United Nations, allowing the safe passage of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea. And then what else do we have here? The United Nations is currently working on ideas to maintain grain shipments from Ukraine and Russia amid concerns of rising food prices and hunger. But Russia still continues their attack. Ukraine was able to shoot down 37 of 63 Russian missiles that tried to hit critical export infrastructure and military facilities in the Odessa region as well. If you look at the
Yeah,
videos online, it is brutal. I mean, I've seen a little kid get pulled out of the rubble from the attacks, and Russia's yeah, that's
yeah. This war
mind blowing.
continues to become more and more gruesome, which is why, you know, more action needs to be done in terms of solving it. But in terms of this grain situation, this is going to affect many regions in the world, including the poorer regions of Africa, of Asia, of the US, of Latin America. Let's just say the poor of the world. This is going to affect everyone who is struggling to pay for food. Inflation is already high. Supply chains are already getting back to normal, but still not at the best place. Um, so this is not good. But Russia came out with a statement, and they said they believe that the U.S. and Ukraine and other partners were not allowing the pact to be carried out fairly. It is impossible for Russia to export some agricultural products. And another quote is when the part of the Black Sea deal related to Russia is implemented, Russia will immediately return to the implementation of the deal. So that was interesting, but there's a little bit of confusion because there was a letter sent to the UN that basically said I'm reading this letter right now by the Russian Federation. It says termination of the agreement from 18 July 23 means withdrawal of the security guarantees for navigation in the northwestern part of the Black Sea, termination of the operation of MHC, and dissolution of the JCC, head of the Russian JCC group. Signed by Russian leader Luik. So there's confusion whether it's terminated or suspended. Both are bad, but there's confusion whether it's terminated or suspended. So this situation is becoming tricky every day.
I think from what I got, I think it's full termination, and they've completely left the deal. So they're pretty much have free reign to do whatever they want with the grain shipments, which so far they've just destroyed
Yep,
60,000 tons of grain. And this goes back to the last episode we did, topic of the week, strengthening international
yep,
institutions. The first thing that came
yes,
up to my mind was, what is the UN's response? I don't care what the West response is. I want the international response. I want a UN response. This was a
yep,
deal brokered by the UN. It
yes,
lasted only a year, which shows you cracks in the international institutions. To see, it shows you that any agreements that they make are still just not strong enough to just stand alone. The United Nations still needs to say, listen, you are doing this. In response, we will do that. Meaning there needs
yep.
to be some sort of retaliation. Like I don't know. Like I that's kind of my hot take is the United Nations should we there should be up for a vote. What are we going to do? What is the next plan? As the international community, vote up in the General Assembly. What are our next steps? What is going to be the international response to this? There needs to be some
Yeah,
sort of consequence. The United Nations is not good at consequences because there
yeah,
is sovereignty issues.
exactly.
What
And,
about what
and, and
about about the sovereignty of countries like of regions or countries or whatever you want to call them, of countries like Taiwan? What about the people in Kosovo? What about the people in Ukraine? What about where is the international response in these
there's none.
regions?
And
None.
there's not going to be any because it's only going to continue to get worse now because there is no grain being able to go to the countries that need it the most. And so the international response should be so much greater, but it can't be. Because what can the General Assembly technically do? Nothing. They can put something out on the floor, they can write a resolution, it'll pass the two-thirds majority, but at the end of the day, that's not binding law. No party actually has to abide by those laws. Now, a lot of them might, if they start doing more sanctions, but it still doesn't do anything. And then you go to the Security Council. Well, Russia is on the Security Council, so if they see a binding resolution that's going to go through, that's going to affect them, they're going to use their veto power. There's no response that the UN can do. If UN respond or if NATO responds, then it's an act of war. It's so frustrating
There's
because there
no
needs to
such
be something
thing
better.
as international law. It's just there. It's just
Yeah,
guidelines, suggestions. This deal should have not been a suggestion. It should have been, listen, the international community says we need grains and we will take them out of the Odessa region. Period. If you fail to follow these international laws, just the weight of international law should be enough to make it feel binding, let alone need something as a consequence for it to be binding, which it's the first thing that came to my mind was our last episode we did. Lack of
yeah,
binding international law.
and the problem is the sovereignty plays such a big role, and it obviously I agree it should because there are some things that touch the sovereignty line. But like, let's face it, these two countries are at war, Ukraine and Russia. Well, Russia is attacking the Ukraine. It's not even that they're at war; they're attacking them, and Ukraine is defending itself. I don't personally don't think that Russia should have a say period on what they do in the international stage at all. They shouldn't be able to do anything. But what can they realistically do to enforce Russia to follow these rules? There's just nothing. There's nothing at all, and it's only going to get worse because what's next? Is the next thing going to be that they can't that Russia's going to cut off oil from exporting to anybody else, and natural gases to anybody in the world, other food items to anybody in the world? Grain is so huge. It is the crop that keeps most of the world turning because without grain, you can't most people can't eat. So now you're setting back poverty and food hunger to an all-time high with this initiative, with what they're doing. This one letter that the Russian JCC group head sent to the UN has basically created a bigger problem for world hunger. A letter, you know, like that's not good.
They left the deal, blew up the port, and said, "Here's a letter. F you all." That is
Yeah,
that's just like a big middle finger to the international community. That is an embarrassment to the international community. Where they said, "We
yeah,
don't care about the hungry people. We don't care about hunger. We don't care about anything." That's that's
we care about
that's what the letter
ourselves.
is. That's what the letter is to me. But
Yeah.
what's
So
next? I can't even tell you. I can't. I don't even know where we can go because the question is sovereignty and the question is Russia. So what?
yeah, and the question
Let's.
is the United Nations.
Yeah, the question is the United Nations response. What will be the deal that the UN, the next deal that the UN will broker? What will be the second edition, second prototype? What's the word I'm looking for? Second model. That's the word I'm looking
Yeah.
for. What will be the second model to this deal? What is it in for Russia? That's where the UN is going to go to head next. I'm not
Something
sure
has to
if
be
this
brokered.
was, huh?
Something has to be brokered. I mean, it's like
At this point,
it's
yeah. What we need to give up something, which is going to be give up what something that Russia wants to export out, something that's been sanctioned that Russia might want sanctions removed out of. It's it's tricky. It's going to be very tricky for
yeah,
the UN to broker, and
tricky
it's the US
situation.
to say like, oh, we're going or NATO, right? Can't just say, all right, we're going to go grab our boats, park them in the sea, so we can let grain come out. That's like right on the line. Like
Playing with fire.
that's yeah, that's playing with fire. So for anyone that says we should send NATO warships to get grain out, not a viable option.
No,
We're
no, it's
already
not
on
like that.
we're already on the line. It's just like how much farther can we dig into that line before it's war?
Oh, the line is a little tiny piece of like those that like the little things that get on your like cotton shirts that you pull out.
Oh yeah,
That's how thin the line is at the moment. And if that
yeah.
line breaks, I mean, it's going to be catastrophic, the results. So, yeah, I don't know what the next steps are going to be. And of all the things we discussed today, it's showing the future of international institutions and cooperation. And we're seeing in some areas some pretty good progress, some significant progress in other areas, but then in most things we're seeing setback after setback after setback. And this is a major setback. And who knows where the world goes next.
You think we're moving forward and then we just lose our progress and then we're just back to where we were. Then we find
Yeah.
something else in the world where we agree on and then we go two steps back. So
Yep. Two steps. I mean, this is like 4 or 5 steps back.
this
This
was a
is
major setback
crazy.
globally.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but I don't
It's
have
just
anything
people
else
are
to.
saying like it's just grain, but like it's not just grain. It's like
It's the backbone of the world.
yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
think the
very
next step
important.
should be to focus more on independency as well because I'm not personally, if I were a country, I would not rely on the United Nations at this time. I would
No,
find some ways of self dependency should I be a leader of my own people.
I
That I
agree.
would look more domestically at the moment until I find viable partners in the world that also have good grain exports and develop grain partnerships.
Yeah,
That's what
I
I
agree.
would do. For at
That's
the
what
time being.
everyone should do. which is what you'll hear in our topic of the week. That's fascinating one.
Yeah, but I don't have anything else to add on this. Hopefully, we were able to successfully summarize and offer thoughtful analysis on all these LGDs. It is three big agenda items, and hopefully, in the 35 minutes ish that we did, hopefully it was good enough for all you guys to enjoy.
Yeah, hope so. Everyone, make sure to keep doing your research and stay up to date on these topics. But otherwise, have a good one.
Take care.